The morning air hung thick with salt and diesel fumes as Lieutenant Victor Krulak stood on the deck of the landing craft, his knuckles white against the metal railing. June 6, 1944. The choppy waters of the English Channel slapped against the hull of the shallow-draft vessel as it approached the beaches of Normandy. Through the misty dawn, he could make out the silhouettes of thousands of identical boats, each packed with 36 terrified American soldiers. The distinctive sound of the ramp clanking down echoed across the water as the first wave of men rushed onto Omaha Beach, directly into German machine gun fire. Krulak's throat tightened as he watched the scene unfold, a scene made possible by his own stubborn defiance of military convention 7 years earlier. No one in the United States Marine Corps knew that one man's determination that morning would rewrite the entire strategy of amphibious warfare and ultimately help win World War II. Born in Denver, Colorado, on January 7, 1913, Victor Harold Krulak hardly seemed destined for military greatness. The son of Jewish immigrants, a fact he would later conceal throughout his military career, young Victor grew up understanding what it meant to be an outsider. His diminutive stature, barely 5 feet 5 inches tall, earned him the ironic nickname Brute from his Naval Academy classmates, a moniker that would follow him throughout his life, though few would ever mistake the sharpness of his mind. Krulak's childhood had been marked by a relentless fascination with engineering and military history. While other boys his age played baseball, Victor could be found constructing elaborate model boats in his father's workshop, carefully studying their hydrodynamics and constantly modifying their designs for improved performance. This early passion for naval architecture would later prove prophetic, though at the time it seemed merely the eccentric hobby of a boy too small to excel in sports. When Krulak entered the United States Naval Academy in 1930, his physical stature required a special exemption. The minimum height requirement for officer candidates was 5 feet 6 inches, 1 inch taller than Krulak would ever grow. But what he lacked in height, he made up for in intellectual prowess and determination. His professors noted his exceptional ability to visualize mechanical problems and solutions, a talent that set him apart from his peers. "I knew I'd have to work twice as hard to earn half the respect," Krulak would later recall in his memoirs. "When you're the smallest man in the room, you need the biggest ideas." After graduating from Annapolis in 1934, Krulak chose the Marine Corps over the Navy, a decision that raised eyebrows among his classmates. The Marines were considered the more physically demanding branch, and many doubted whether the diminutive Krulak could handle the rigors of Marine life. But he had calculated that the smaller service offered greater opportunities for advancement and innovation. It was a decision that would alter not only his own destiny, but the very future of amphibious warfare. During his early years as a Marine officer, Krulak demonstrated an uncanny ability to spot tactical weaknesses and devise practical solutions. His fellow officers began to notice that the nickname Brute had taken on a new meaning, not for his physical strength, but for his brutal efficiency and relentless pursuit of better military doctrine. Little did he know that an assignment as a military observer would soon place him at the intersection of history, technology, and warfare in a way that would change the course of World War II. As he stood on the deck of a ship heading toward Shanghai in 1937, he could never have imagined how the next few months would transform him from a junior officer into the architect of modern amphibious assault. "Some men spend a lifetime searching for their moment," his commanding officer had told him before the Shanghai deployment. Others recognize it the instant it appears before them. For Krulak, that moment was about to arrive on the muddy shores of China, where an entirely different war was already raging, one that would provide the blueprint for the greatest amphibious operations in military history. The world in the late 1930s was already sliding toward global conflict. While America watched from across the oceans, Japan had launched a full-scale invasion of China, beginning what many historians now consider the true start of World War II in the Pacific. As part of America's cautious response, the Marine Corps dispatched observers to Shanghai to monitor Japanese military operations. Among them was the young Lieutenant Victor Krulak. In August of 1937, Krulak found himself on the docks of Shanghai, a city in chaos as Japanese forces pressed their advantage against Chinese defenders. What caught his professional eye wasn't the aerial bombardment or the artillery barrages, but something seemingly mundane, the Japanese landing craft. With meticulous attention to detail, Krulak observed how the Japanese Imperial Navy had developed innovative shallow-draft boats with a critical feature, a bow ramp that could be lowered, allowing troops and equipment to disembark directly onto the beach. This was in stark contrast to American landing craft of the time, which required troops to climb over the sides, exposing themselves to enemy fire and slowing deployment significantly. Recognizing the tactical significance of this design, Krulak did something extraordinary. Using a borrowed camera with a telephoto lens, he surreptitiously photographed the Japanese landing boats from multiple angles. At considerable personal risk, had he been caught, he might have been accused of espionage. Krulak documented every detail of the vessels, from their shallow drafts to their retractable ramps. What I witnessed in Shanghai wasn't just a battle, Krulak would later write. It was a glimpse into the future of warfare, and I knew in that moment that if America didn't learn this lesson quickly, we would pay for it in blood. Upon returning to the United States, Krulak compiled a detailed report, Japanese Assault Boats, Shanghai, 1937, complete with photographs and technical observations. With the urgency of a man who had seen the future, he submitted his findings to Marine Corps headquarters, certain that his superiors would recognize the revolutionary nature of what he had discovered. The response was disappointing. His report was filed away, dismissed by the bureaucracy as coming from some nut out in China. The prevailing wisdom among senior naval planners was that large-scale amphibious operations would be conducted through established ports and harbors, not across open beaches. The idea of purpose-built landing craft seemed unnecessary to military leaders who couldn't envision the island-hopping campaign that would define the Pacific War. But Krulak refused to let the matter drop. In a move that would have ended the career of a less determined officer, he continued to advocate for his findings, pushing against the institutional inertia of military thinking. When conventional channels failed him, he took an extraordinary step. He built a precise scale model of the Japanese landing craft. With the detailed model in hand, Krulak approached Andrew Jackson Higgins, a New Orleans-based boat builder who had been designing shallow-draft vessels for operation in the Louisiana bayous. Higgins, a maverick entrepreneur with a reputation for innovation and a healthy disrespect for authority, immediately grasped the significance of Krulak's observations. "You bring me a problem that needs solving," Higgins reportedly told Krulak during their first meeting, "and I'll build you a boat that can solve it." This unlikely partnership between a junior Marine officer acting without official authorization and a civilian boat builder outside the military-industrial establishment was about to change the course of the war that had not yet begun. What followed would become one of the most consequential examples of military innovation in American history, and it happened not through official channels, but through the sheer determination of two men who refused to take no for an answer. Neither of them could have anticipated how their collaboration would impact the beaches of Normandy, Iwo Jima, and countless other shorelines where American troops would eventually storm ashore. All they knew was that they had identified a critical gap in America's military capability, and they were determined to fill it before it was too late. As Victor Krulak and Andrew Higgins began their unofficial collaboration in the late 1930s, the geopolitical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Nazi Germany had annexed Austria, then Czechoslovakia, and was clearly preparing for further aggression in Europe. In Asia, Japan's expansion continued unabated. Despite these ominous signs, America's military remained woefully underprepared for a global conflict, particularly in the specialized area of amphibious warfare. The United States Marine Corps, which would bear the primary responsibility for amphibious operations, was struggling with inadequate equipment. The standard landing craft of the day was the LCPR, Landing Craft Personnel, RAMPed, a vessel designed by the Navy's Bureau of Ships. During exercises, these boats consistently performed poorly. They couldn't navigate shallow waters, frequently became stuck on sandbars, and required troops to disembark over the sides in often chest-deep water. Military planners recognized these deficiencies, but seemed content to work within the constraints of existing technology. Krulak and Higgins had a different vision. Working without official sanction, Higgins adapted his Eureka boat, a shallow draft vessel originally designed for operating in the swamps and bayous of Louisiana, to incorporate the ramped bow that Krulak had observed on Japanese landing craft. The innovation seemed simple on the surface, a front-loading ramp that could be lowered onto a beach, allowing troops and vehicles to disembark directly. But the engineering challenges were considerable, requiring a boat that could approach a beach in shallow water, hold position while troops disembarked, and then retract itself without becoming stranded. By 1941, with war clouds gathering, Higgins had produced a prototype at his own expense. When Navy officials finally agreed to test the boat, they were skeptical. The test was conducted on Lake Pontchartrain, near New Orleans, with Higgins employees acting as troops. To everyone's amazement except Higgins and Krulak, the boat performed flawlessly, demonstrating capabilities far beyond anything the Navy had developed internally. The vessel could carry a full platoon of 36 combat-equipped Marines or a jeep with 12 men. It could operate in water as shallow as 3 feet, beach itself, unload through its front ramp, and then retract back into deeper water, all within minutes. Perhaps most importantly, it could be mass-produced quickly and at relatively low cost. Despite this successful demonstration, resistance within the military establishment remained strong. The Navy's Bureau of Ships was reluctant to adopt a design developed by an outsider, particularly one as unorthodox as Andrew Higgins, who was known for his combative personality and colorful language. Krulak, now serving as an aide to General Holland Smith, became Higgins's advocate within the military hierarchy. Using his position, he arranged for more comprehensive tests and demonstrations, gradually building support for the revolutionary landing craft. The breakthrough came when the Marine Corps, increasingly frustrated with the Bureau of Ships' inability to deliver effective landing craft, expressed interest in Higgins's boat. General Smith, impressed by what he saw during demonstrations, began championing the design, referring to it as an answer to the Marine prayer. By this time, America's entry into World War II was imminent. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and the United States was thrust into global conflict. Suddenly, the need for effective landing craft wasn't theoretical. It was urgent and existential. In the immediate aftermath of Pearl Harbor, the Navy and Marine Corps faced the daunting task of planning amphibious operations across the vast Pacific Ocean. The war in Europe would also eventually require massive amphibious landings to retake the continent from Nazi control. Without effective landing craft, these operations would be impossible. In this moment of national crisis, the military finally embraced the boat that Krulak had championed and Higgins had built. The design was officially designated the LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, but throughout the war, it would be known simply as the Higgins boat, a name that failed to acknowledge Krulak's crucial role in its development. As America mobilized for war, Higgins Industries expanded from a small boatyard with fewer than 75 employees to a manufacturing colossus employing over 20,000 workers across 7 plants in New Orleans. The company would ultimately produce more than 20,000 boats for the war effort, including 12,500 LCVPs. For Victor Krulak, the adoption of the landing craft he had championed was vindication after years of being ignored and dismissed. Yet he had little time to savor this triumph. The Pacific War was intensifying, and Krulak, now a captain, volunteered for combat duty. His persistence had helped solve one of the military's most pressing problems, but his personal war was just beginning. The boat he helped create, meanwhile, was about to transform the nature of amphibious warfare and, with it, the entire strategic landscape of World War II. As one naval historian would later write, without Krulak's observation and Higgins's innovation, the liberation of Europe and the defeat of Japan might have taken years longer, at a cost of countless additional lives. What they witnessed next would inspire military planners for decades to come. In the early hours of August 7, 1942, the first major American offensive of the Pacific War began on the beaches of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. As dawn broke over the Pacific, a flotilla of Higgins boats approached the shore, each loaded with Marines from the 1st Marine Division. The landing craft's ramps dropped in unison, and thousands of Marines stormed ashore to establish a beachhead. Unlike previous amphibious operations in military history, this assault didn't require a deep-water port or harbor. It targeted an open beach made possible by the innovative landing craft that Krulak had envisioned years earlier. By this time, Victor Krulak had completed parachute training and was commanding the 2nd Parachute Battalion, 1st Marine Amphibious Corps. He would soon see firsthand the impact of his innovation in combat operations across the Pacific. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very boats he had helped create were now delivering his fellow Marines into battle. As the Pacific Campaign intensified, the Higgins boat became the workhorse of amphibious operations. On beaches from Tarawa to Saipan, from Iwo Jima to Okinawa, these vessels delivered American forces directly into combat. The boat's shallow draft and front ramp allowed landings on beaches previously considered unsuitable for amphibious operations, giving military planners unprecedented flexibility in choosing invasion sites. This tactical advantage proved decisive. Japanese defenses were often concentrated around harbors and established ports, expecting conventional landings. The ability to land virtually anywhere along a coastline repeatedly caught Japanese forces by surprise, forcing them to disperse their defenses and giving American forces the initiative. In the European theater, the Higgins boat's impact was equally profound. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the largest amphibious operation in history began on the beaches of Normandy. Over 4,000 landing craft, including 2,300 Higgins boats, delivered 160,000 Allied troops onto the French coastline in the first 24 hours alone. Without these specialized vessels, Operation Overlord would have been impossible. The strategic importance of the Higgins boat wasn't lost on the highest echelons of military leadership. Years after the war, General Dwight D. Eisenhower would declare, "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us. If Higgins had not designed and built those LCVPs, we never could have landed over an open beach. The whole strategy of the war would have been different." What fewer people recognized was that behind Higgins's construction genius stood Krulak's original insight and persistence. Without his observations in Shanghai and his determination to change military doctrine, the Higgins boat might never have existed. Meanwhile, Krulak's personal war took a dramatic turn in the fall of 1943. Now a lieutenant colonel, he led his battalion in a daring diversionary raid on Choiseul Island in the Solomons. The operation was designed to draw Japanese attention away from the main American landing at Bougainville. For 7 high-stakes days, Krulak's force of 700 men created the impression of a much larger invasion, successfully diverting thousands of Japanese troops from the actual landing site. During this operation, Krulak was seriously wounded, but refused evacuation, continuing to lead his battalion until the mission was complete. For his actions, he was awarded the Navy Cross, one of the nation's highest military decorations, as well as the Purple Heart. As Krulak recuperated from his wounds, the boats he had helped create continued to reshape the Pacific War. In February 1945, Marines landed on Iwo Jima, a volcanic island just 600 miles from mainland Japan. The iconic image of Marines raising the American flag atop Mount Suribachi became one of the most recognizable photographs of the war, and those Marines had reached the island aboard Higgins boats. By the war's end, the Higgins boat had become so integral to American military operations that it was impossible to imagine how the war could have been won without it. More than 20,000 of these vessels had been produced, and they had landed American troops on every major beachhead of the war. The boat's impact extended beyond tactical advantages. It had fundamentally altered military strategy, enabling a campaign of island hopping across the Pacific and opening multiple fronts in Europe that would have been impossible using conventional port-based landings. The scale of this achievement becomes even more remarkable when one considers its origins. A junior officer's unauthorized observation of enemy equipment, a civilian boat builder working outside military procurement channels, and a collaboration that proceeded despite institutional resistance. Together, these elements produced one of the most consequential innovations of World War II. For Victor Krulak, the war's end brought new challenges and opportunities. His reputation as both a combat leader and an innovator had been firmly established. In the post-war military, he would continue to champion unconventional thinking, playing key roles in the development of helicopter warfare and counterinsurgency doctrine. But perhaps his greatest legacy remained those flat-bottomed boats with front-loading ramps, vessels that had carried American forces to victory on beaches around the world, fundamentally changing the nature of amphibious warfare forever. As one military historian noted, the mathematics of victory were written in the simple design of the Higgins boat, a design that might never have existed without Victor Krulak's determined vision. The consequences of Krulak's observation and persistence extended far beyond the beaches of World War II. As American forces returned home in 1945, military planners began assessing the lessons of the global conflict. Among the most significant was the value of amphibious capability, a form of warfare that had been transformed by the Higgins boat. In the immediate post-war period, Krulak, now a full colonel, continued to push the boundaries of military thinking. Perhaps influenced by his experience with the Higgins boat, he became an early and passionate advocate for another revolutionary form of transport, the helicopter. Just as the landing craft had solved the problem of getting troops from ship to shore, Krulak envisioned helicopters solving the problem of moving forces inland from the beachhead. In 1946, Krulak famously demonstrated the potential of helicopter operations by having himself photographed dangling from a helicopter at the basic school to illustrate the concept of vertical envelopment. The image, shocking at the time, perfectly captured Krulak's willingness to place himself at personal risk to advance a military concept he believed in. Krulak co-authored the first textbook on helicopter warfare for the Marine Corps, establishing doctrines that would later prove invaluable in Korea and Vietnam. His pioneering work earned him the nickname Father of Vertical Envelopment, adding to his reputation as a military visionary. During the Korean War, Krulak's expertise in amphibious operations again proved critical. He served as an advisor to General Douglas MacArthur for the daring landing at Incheon in September 1950, an operation that MacArthur described as the most perfect amphibious landing in military history. The success at Incheon, which dramatically reversed the course of the Korean War, relied heavily on the amphibious capabilities that Krulak had helped develop a decade earlier. By 1955, Krulak had been promoted to brigadier general at the remarkably young age of 42. His rapid ascent through the ranks reflected both his combat record and his intellectual contributions to military doctrine. During the Vietnam War, Krulak commanded all Marine forces in the Pacific and developed counterinsurgency strategies that differed markedly from the Army's approach. His ink blot strategy emphasized protecting villages and working with local populations rather than focusing on body counts and large-scale operations. This strategic disagreement ultimately led to a career-defining moment. In 1967, Krulak met with President Lyndon B. Johnson to discuss Vietnam strategy. During this meeting, Krulak bluntly told the president that American forces were targeting the wrong objectives. Johnson, reportedly angered by this frank assessment, ended the meeting abruptly. As Krulak later recalled, "He got to his feet and propelled me to the door politely. That's the last I ever saw of him." This candid exchange likely cost Krulak the position he had long coveted, Commandant of the Marine Corps. Despite his impressive record and qualifications, he was passed over for the Corps' top job. In 1968, Krulak retired from active duty as a lieutenant general after 34 years of military service. Yet even in retirement, Krulak's influence persisted. He became a prolific writer on military affairs, publishing articles and eventually an influential book, First to Fight, an inside view of the U.S. Marine Corps, which remains required reading for Marines today. He also served as an executive with Copley newspapers, continuing to shape public discourse on military matters. The Higgins boat, meanwhile, had become firmly entrenched in American military lore. Although newer, more sophisticated landing craft would eventually replace it, the basic concept, a shallow draft vessel with a front-loading ramp, remains the foundation of modern amphibious craft design. The boats Krulak helped create established a template that would influence naval architecture for generations. Perhaps the most telling tribute to Krulak's vision came decades after the war, when the Marine Corps University established the Brute Krulak Center for Innovation and Creativity to foster the same kind of unconventional thinking that had characterized his career. The center's mission to challenge established doctrines and develop new approaches to warfare perfectly captures the spirit of the man who refused to accept that amphibious landings couldn't be improved. Throughout his life, Krulak remained characteristically modest about his role in developing the Higgins boat. While Andrew Higgins received well-deserved recognition for building the vessels, including Eisenhower's famous statement that he won the war for us, Krulak's crucial contribution in identifying the need and concept often went unacknowledged. This oversight seemed not to bother him. He was more concerned with results than with credit. As the decades passed, the full extent of Krulak's contribution to the Higgins boat gradually came to light through historical research and documentation. What emerged was the story of a junior officer who had seen beyond conventional wisdom, recognized a critical military need, and persisted against institutional inertia to help develop a solution that would change the course of history. In retrospect, the development of the Higgins boat represents a perfect case study in military innovation, the recognition of a problem, the identification of a potential solution, and the determination to overcome bureaucratic obstacles to implementation. That this process was driven largely by a junior officer operating outside official channels makes it all the more remarkable. Victor Brute Krulak passed away on December 29, 2008, at the age of 95. His legacy includes not just the landing craft that helped win World War II, but a lifetime of military innovation and leadership. From amphibious warfare to helicopter operations to counterinsurgency doctrine, Krulak repeatedly demonstrated the ability to see beyond current limitations and envision new possibilities. The story of Victor Krulak and the Higgins boat serves as a powerful reminder of how individual insight and determination can overcome institutional resistance to change. It demonstrates that even in large hierarchical organizations like the military, a single person with clarity of vision can make a difference that alters the course of history. As we look back on the beaches of Normandy, Iwo Jima, and countless other amphibious operations, we can trace their success to that moment in Shanghai, when a young Marine lieutenant recognized the significance of a Japanese landing craft with a front-loading ramp. The chain of events that followed, from unauthorized photographs to scale models, from meetings with a civilian boat builder to worldwide deployment, illustrates how innovation often follows unexpected paths. In an age of increasing technological complexity and institutional caution, Krulak's example remains particularly relevant. It reminds us that sometimes the most consequential innovations come not from formal research and development processes, but from individuals who observe, question, and persist. When we consider how different World War II might have been without the Higgins boat, how many more lives might have been lost attempting landings with inadequate equipment, how many operations might have been delayed or abandoned, how much longer the conflict might have lasted, we begin to appreciate the full measure of Krulak's contribution. The question that naturally arises is one that resonates beyond military contexts. Would you have had the courage to challenge established thinking as Krulak did? Would you have persisted when your observations were dismissed as coming from some nut out in China? Would you have found allies outside the system when the system itself proved resistant to change? These are not merely historical curiosities, but questions that remain relevant in any organization facing the need for innovation and adaptation. The courage to observe clearly, think independently, and act persistently, these are the qualities that made Victor Krulak one of the most terrifying American engineers of World War II. Not to his countrymen, but to the enemies who faced the consequences of his innovations on beaches around the world. Share this story so others remember what courage really means, not just the physical bravery of combat, which Krulak certainly demonstrated, but the moral courage to stand for an idea when conventional wisdom stands against you.